Samana Bushinizu, welcome back to our program. The Communist Party of Vietnam held the 9th national meeting from April 19th to 22nd last year. The meeting, which is held once every 5 years, is to frame the political and economic policies of the country in the coming years. What were the implications of this conference?
I would say the 9th Congress of the Vietnamese Communist Party was characterized by the reassertion of the reform policies. The first implication is that the new leadership was nominated as the General Secretary of the Communist Party. He is Mr. Non Doc Man. He is from a minority and he has a reputation of being flexible in his policies. The second implication is that the importance of industrialization and modernization in Vietnamese economy was emphasized again at the Congress.
Based on the Doi Moi, which was launched in 1986, Vietnam has been trying to develop a market economy in the socialist structure. In the present era of economic globalization, what is the most urgent problem of Vietnam's domestic economy?
Doi Moi was an experiment to introduce a market economy in the social system in Vietnam. In general, one can say that Doi Moi succeeded in realizing a rapid economic growth through an encouragement of production and a level up of productivity, particularly in increasing the production of agriculture. Now, Vietnam is the second biggest exporter of rice in the world. However, Vietnam faces now new challenges if it tries to be an integral part of world economy. The new challenges include an improvement in quality of production in agriculture as well as in industry. How to improve the quality of commodities? This is a very important challenge. For instance, Vietnam is exporting rice, but the price declined. One of the reasons is that quality control of rice is not sufficient enough. The second task for Vietnam is to overcome an enormous income gap between the urban sector and the rural sector, which developed very rapidly during the last decade. The third task is a huge amount of non-performance loans supplied by the major state commercial banks. I would like to add about the first one. The overproduction of rice is a headache for the peasants, accompanied by decline prices, as I mentioned. So, at the same time, the decline of price of coffee, pepper, and cashew nuts, because of overproduction, is causing anxiety among the peasants. The diversification of agricultural production for profitable agriculture is a new challenge.
In July 2000, Vietnam signed a trade agreement with the United States, which came into effect in December 2000. How advantageous is this bilateral trade agreement to Vietnam, both politically and economically?
The new status entitles Vietnam to enjoy lower custom tariffs on its export to the United States. The rate decreases from about 40% to 4%. Therefore, a rapid increase of export of goods to the United States is expected by as much as $1 billion. The most important export commodities are garments, clothing and footwear, while Vietnam imports for Boeing's airplanes. However, according to the agreement, the U.S. has to renew Vietnam's normal trade status every year, which may bring in political debate of human rights issues in Vietnam. Vietnam wants to avoid this kind of linkage between an economic issue with a political one. Anyway, a trade agreement paves the way for Vietnam's membership of the WTO in the future.
So, shifting our focus just a bit, China joined the World Trade Organization in December 2001. How is China's entry into this international organization expected to affect Vietnam's foreign trade?
The entry of China into WTO is expected to have a very significant impact on the Vietnamese economy in two ways. As other members of ASEAN, Vietnam is afraid if foreign investors shift their target of investment in China as a sacrifice of neighboring countries. At the same time, Vietnam tries to get a benefit out of the economic potentialities of China through trade. It is noteworthy that Vietnam's trade with China suddenly expanded since 1998. Between 1998 and 2000, namely only through the 3 years, the mutual trade increased by 3 times to the level of US $3 billion, which accounts for about 10% of Vietnam's external trade. Vietnam exports, for instance, vegetables and fruit to China, making use of its geographical proximity. The border trade with the southern provinces in China is flourishing now. China processes them and exports some of them outside.
Vietnam became an official member of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, in July 1995. In 1998, it joined the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Conference, or APEC. Which positions does Vietnam hold in these international organizations, and which responsibilities does it have to shoulder as a regular member of these organizations?
Vietnam's entry to ASEAN, together with Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, contributed to transform ASEAN itself into a full-fledged organization for a regional cooperation organization in Southeast Asia. At the same time, this is one of the challenges for Vietnam's economy because ASEAN intends to decrease trade barriers among themselves. Compared to less developed countries, compared with the original members of ASEAN, Vietnam is given a period of allowances before Vietnam opens its door fully to other members in the after ASEAN Free Trade Agreement. The membership of APEC also pushed Vietnam to adopt the trade and investment rules for globalization. In spite of the expected difficulties, Vietnam tried to make use of those external pressures to promote industrialization and modernization and to increase the productivity.
So at present, Vietnam is negotiating for joining the World Trade Organization in 2005. What are Vietnam's requirements to be an official member of WTO?
The WTO urges Vietnam to speed up procedures for accession to WTO. The Vietnam has to respond to many questions of the WTO members. The most sensitive issue is a guarantee of access to the Vietnam's domestic market. Although special allowances could be given to the developing countries at the initial period of accession to the WTO, Vietnam has to prepare for intense competition in the domestic market also. What is important at this stage is to improve the quality of products. Although Vietnam might be able to compete in the market with cheap labor for the moment, standardization of products, transformation and composition of export items from the rice, crude, products to higher value-added products. So these are also new challenges which Vietnam has to respond to realize its accession to the WTO.
The Japanese Prime Minister, Junichiro Koizumi, visited Vietnam on April 29th and had talks with several leaders of Vietnamese politics, including the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam, Nom Duc Man. Professor, which topics were discussed in the meetings for strengthening economic ties between Japan and Vietnam? And what will Japan-Vietnam economic relations be like in the near future?
As you know, Japan is the biggest partner for Vietnamese trade, and also Japan is the biggest aid donor. And so the relations between Japan and Vietnam is very important, not only for Vietnam, also for Japan. And when our Prime Minister Koizumi visited Vietnam, he talked with Vietnam leaders on several issues. But one of the issues is to promote the conclusion of the investment guarantee agreement so that Japan's investment in Vietnam could be promoted. And the second one was a proposal by the Vietnam side to conclude a free trade agreement with Japan. But unfortunately, Japan is not ready to conclude this kind of agreement with Vietnam because of the industrial or the economic structure of Vietnam. Particularly, Vietnam is an agricultural country. So Japan has to cope with. If Japan concludes a free trade agreement with Vietnam, Japan has to face a sort of the inflow of the agricultural products of Vietnam. So Japan is not ready for the moment to have this kind of agreement. But except for this, I would say the future relations, economic relations between Japan and Vietnam would improve very much because Vietnam is now ready to liberalize much more there's regulations concerning foreign direct investment. So Japanese investors are very hopeful to promote more investment in Vietnam.
Professor Manabushimizu, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.